death of another rock musician was disclosed today. Jim Morrison, 27.
A 27-year-old rock star is pronounced dead inside an apartment on the Rue Betrales. No autopsy is ordered, no press conference is held. The death certificate is signed within hours, and the body is in the ground 4 days later, in a country where he was, for all practical purposes, a stranger for 36 years. That was the entire record. Heart failure. Case closed. Then in 2007, a man who had spent 3 decades in silence opened his mouth, and the story America had accepted since 1971 started to come apart. Remember him the way the record sleeves wanted you to, the leather pants, the bare chest under the stage lights, the voice that turned light my fire and break on through into a sound of a generation deciding it didn't have to behave anymore. Jim Morrison wasn't just a singer, he was the fantasy of total freedom set to a baseline. By the time the doors were selling out arenas, the machine around Morrison had a story to tell, and it told it well. The poet shaman, untouchable, living entirely on instinct. What that story left out was a man drowning in alcohol, cycling through the arrest for public decency, and burning out in real time in front of paying audiences. America bought the myth. Paris, where Morrison fled in 1971, hoping to disappear into his poetry, got the man underneath it. Here's what actually documented. On the night of July 2nd, into the early morning of July 3rd, 1971, Morrison's girlfriend, Camilla Corson, told French police that they had gone to a movie, come home, and that the Morrison, feeling ill, had drawn himself a bath. She said she checked on him and found him unresponsive. Medical help arrived too late. That account, given by the only witness police interviewed, became the official record. And under French law at that time, because there was no visible sign of foul play, no autopsy was legally required, no toxicology, no forensic timeline, just one woman's statement, a death certificate, and a burial at Père Lachaise Cemetery within days. Unusually fast for a foreign celebrity with no next of kin present at the time of death. That gap, the absence of any independent verification, is not a rumor. It is a documented fact of the case file, and it is exactly the gap that a man named Sam Bernett would walk into 36 years later. In 2007, Sam Bernett, who had managed a left bank nightclub called the Roll Circus, a spot Morrison reportedly visited most nights during his final months in the Paris, published a book laying out a different sequence of events entirely. According to Bernett's own account, Morrison came to a club in early hours of July 3rd, went into the bathroom, and didn't come out. A bouncer broke down the stall door. Bernett later described what he found. A doctor at a scene concluded it looked like an overdose of heroin. And described as a drug dealers Morrison had been with, carried his body out and, by the Bernett's account, back to the Rue Betrales apartment, where it was placed in a bathtub. That is Bernett's published claim. It has never been proven and it has never been officially confirmed by the French authorities. Now, here is where this channel draws the line between the record and the rumor. What is documented? Morrison was known to be terrified of needles and, by multiple contemporaneous accounts from people close to him, sniffled rather than injected drugs when he used them. What is documented? Marina Faithfull, who was regular at that same club, had publicly said Morrison was on the premises around that period. No autopsy exists to confirm either the heart failure story or the overdose story with certainty, because none was ever performed. Now, what is not documented, despite decades of tabloid retelling, that Pamela Coercion was paid off, that the French police were bribed, or that there was ever a formal cover up involving government officials, those are dramatizations that grew up around the Bennett's claim, not things Bernard himself or any court record has established. The honest answer, the one the record actually sports, is this. Two accounts exist. One came from a grieving girlfriend who died of her own overdose 3 years later and was never ever cross examined, and the other came from a nightclub manager who waited 36 years to speak and cannot fully prove his version either. Neither was ever being tested against forensic evidence because that evidence was never collected. What Jim Morrison's death actually proves isn't a conspiracy. It's simpler and in a way sadder. It proves how easily the truth about a famous life can be lost the moment no one insists on documenting it properly. A death certificate signed in an afternoon. A witness never questioned twice. A body buried before the world outside Paris even understood what had happened. That is not Hollywood covering up mythology. That is what happens when fame outruns the paperwork. It is why, the decades later, every new claim, Burnett's included, finds an audience so ready to believe it, not because the evidence demands it, but because the silence around the original story left a vacuum. And the public, it turns on, would rather have a dramatic answer than an honest, we don't fully know. Whatever you believe happened in that apartment or that nightclub on the night of July 2nd, 1971, one thing is certain. Jim Morrison's voice outlasted every version of the story about how he died. If you were around him when the news broke back in 71, or if the Doors music had just been always part of your life, I would like to hear it. What's your own memory of Jim Morrison, and which song still stops you when it comes on you? Tell us in the comments below.